Well, it's great for us to all be together today. You know, we started this thing 12 years ago. We realized that our culture was becoming increasingly divided, and the one thing we all come together on is the most popular national holiday, the Super Bowl. So we said, why don't we just take what's happening in culture, people love partying around Super Bowl, and meld it to another problem, or a problem, where church attendance is down that weekend. Let's try to put these together, and what do you know, here we are 12 years later, and we're still doing this. So welcome, everybody. It's great having you here today. So one of the popular people in the Bible who's responsible for penning a lot of the New Testament is known as the Apostle Paul. We're going to look at a section of Scripture that he has in the book of 2 Corinthians, which he wrote, and here's what it says. So to keep me from being conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. There's this thorn in the flesh. This is adversity. We're looking at adversity today. Anybody in here have any sense of adversity in your life at all? Like anything you don't necessarily like in your life? Your adversity is dictated by your baseline of success. So Paul had a lot of success in his life, so his baseline of adversity was playing off that success. So if you've got a good life, comfortable life that's here, and you have a little adversity that's down here, it's beneath my realm. I don't like it. I'm in a hard way. But somebody else, their realm of success and well-being could be here, and so what's adversity for you might not be too bad for them. We want to challenge assumptions and get us spiritually stronger because adversity helps us to challenge assumptions.
Yeah, strong, very strong.
Touchdown, Brian Tome. Brian, you're awarded 7 points for a great message and 3 points for use of the phrase. You also have a penalty resulting in the end of first quarter score. Brian Tome 7, Chuck Mingo 0. That's the end of the first quarter. Adversity. Paul and this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible because here's a guy who has great faith, being very honest about a big God question we all have probably asked, which is, God, if there is a God, how can there be this suffering or adversity? Would God bring that to me? How do I deal with that? And Paul is wrestling through this in his personal life. So he says this, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. He prays regularly about it, but you know what answer he gets from God? Response denied. Response denied. Why would it be that God wouldn't answer that prayer, but instead he would get response denied? It's because of the big idea in this quarter, which is adversity can help us face our limits. And it's a good thing to face our limits. You probably heard this before. You probably heard this when you were in adversity. Has anybody ever told you God will never give you more than you can handle? Anybody ever heard that? That is not true. It's not true. One guy put it really well. God does his best work when we are at the end of our rope. What's the thorn? As we've been talking about this idea, what's the thorn in your life, the thorn in your side? And could it be that God actually has something greater in mind by enabling you to embrace that limit rather than eliminate it? We would never pick the thorn. We would never pick the limit. But I want you to just consider that God can actually do more with you embracing the limit than if he eliminated it. And perhaps adversity then becomes an advantage when it helps us face our limits.
Wow, strong.
Touchdown, Chuck Mingo.
Look at that.
Chuck, you're awarded 7 points for a great message, 3 points for use of the phrase, and I'm awarding 3 points during the penalty. That results of an end of first half score. Brian Tome 7, Chuck Mingo 13. That's the end of the first half. And now we're going to see what does God say in response to Paul's request for this thorn to be removed. So in 2 Corinthians 12, again, Paul says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And here's what God says to everyone who has limits, to everyone who has weak moments. God says, my grace is sufficient for you. Who of us hasn't had a 60-second rant in our lives that we wish we could take back? To our spouse, to our children. And God says to all of us, my grace is sufficient for you. I don't know what the limits are that you're facing. I don't know what the adversity is, but I do know that God's grace is sufficient for you. So if you are dealing with the limit of fear in your life, God's grace is sufficient for you. If you are dealing today with the fear, with the limit of guilt for things that you've done, God's grace is sufficient for you. Maybe you came in here and your marriage is on the rocks. I want you to know God's grace is sufficient for your marriage. If you're discouraged today, it doesn't matter because God's grace is sufficient for that discouragement, and He will give you encouragement. No matter where you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what you believe about God, He has grace for you, and it is sufficient. It is sufficient.
Very strong.
Touchdown, Chuck Mingo. Chuck, you're awarded 7 points for a great message. However, I cannot give you 3 points for the phrase. You also had a 3-point penalty that results in an end of third quarter score of Chuck Mingo. Wow, this is tough math. Chuck Mingo 14, Brian Tome 7. That's the end of the third quarter.
Last section of this verse that we'll look at today, the Apostle Paul says, "For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." He's saying that when all of this adversity comes his way, weaknesses, insults, hardships, these are just some of the many adversities we can face, he has a unique way to lean into Christ, because when he is weak, being beaten down by the adversity, he finds grace, he finds something of God that actually makes him bigger eventually and stronger than he was before. This is what adversity does to us, right? Adversity presses us into something, and we come out on the other side a little stronger as a result of it. Now, there is some adversity, there is some suffering that may not have a nice, beautiful bow at the end of it. It's true. I realize that when I'm at the end of my rope, I have hope, because there is a person who's gone before me. His name is Jesus, who has been through crazy adversity, the adversity of being nailed to a cross, the adversity of being shunned, the adversity of feeling separate. And yet through his pain, we get accepted into God's presence, and as a result of that, we have hope. I'm strong, he's strong, because we get to depend on God. Strong because we're less about ourselves and more on God. Strong because our weakness doesn't define us, God defines us. Strong because adversity brings out new and increased strength.
Touchdown, Brian Tome.
Yeah.
Brian, you're awarded 7 points for a great message, 3 points for use of the phrase. That means we have an end-of-game score of Chuck Mingo 14, Brian Tome 17. Brian, you are the Super Bowl preaching champion.